Happy Friday, everyone. Today is Wacky Hair Day, so I hope you guys are all dressed up with your wacky hair or clothes too. Um, it is Wednesday, April 15th, so we are going to continue to focus on the same objective today for um, our lesson. So we're still working on identifying foreshadowing in the text. So foreshadowing, again, it's when the author mentions or hints something that will happen later in the story. So the author is trying to give you a little clue or a hint to help you predict what will happen later in the story. How we are going to identify foreshadowing. We look for incidents that happen early in the story that might relate to the main character. So we're looking for incidents that happen that relate to Percy Jackson. And then again, we look for clues that suggest what might happen. Here's our example of Bambi. You can go back over that if you want. And then I want to talk about an example from yesterday that a lot of you, I'm sure, found in your work. So it says, what events foreshadow Percy is a powerful half-blood in chapters 6 and 7? So one example that foreshadows that he's powerful is when Percy defeats Clarice in the water, with the water from the toilet. So in the text it says, here's your text evidence. Then something happened. I felt a rumble in the pit of my stomach. I turned as the water blasted out of the toilet again, hitting Clarice straight in the face, so hard it pushed her down on her butt. This is foreshadowing because it shows that Percy can defeat a dangerous half-blood by using water in a toilet. This is similar to how he used the water fountain with Nancy Bumblefoot in chapter 1. So today you're going to be looking again for different examples of foreshadowing while you read. And again, I want you to be thinking about who do you think Percy Jackson's father is? And then at the end of the chapter, we'll know, was your prediction correct? So I'm going to be thinking about who you guys chose yesterday in your classwork. And I want you to keep thinking about that today as we're reading. So today we're going to be reading chapter 8. Again, it is linked at the bottom of your page. And then so are the charts for the Greeks, gods, and goddesses. So you can be looking through these as well to kind of help you figure out who you think or who you might predict is Percy's father. So chapter 7 ended in they were about to play a game of capture the flag. So that's where we're going to pick up today. Chapter 8, we capture a flag. The next few days, I settled into a routine that felt almost normal, if you don't count the fact that I was getting lessons from satyrs, nymphs, and a centaur. Each morning I took ancient Greek from Annabeth, and we talked about the gods and goddesses in the present tense, which was kind of weird. I discovered Annabeth was right about my dyslexia. Ancient Greece wasn't hard for me to read, at least no harder than English. After a couple of mornings, I could stumble through a few lines of Homer without much of a headache. The next day, I'd rotate through outdoor activities, looking for something I was good at. Chiron tried to teach me archery, but we found out pretty quick I wasn't good with a bow and arrow. He didn't complain, even when he had to de-snag a stray arrow out of his tail. Foot racing, no good either. The wood nymph instructors left me in the dust. They told me not to worry about it. They'd had centuries of practice running from lovesick gods, but still, it was a little humiliating to be slower than a tree. And wrestling, forget it. Every time I got on the mat, Clarice would pulverize me. There's more where that came from, punk, she'd mumble in my ear. The only thing I really excelled at was canoeing, and that wasn't the kind of heroic skill people expected to see from a kid who had beaten a minotaur. I knew the senior campers and counselors were watching me. They had to decide who my dad was, but they weren't having an easy time of it. I wasn't as strong as the Ares kids, or as good as archery at the Apollo kids. I didn't have Hephaestus' skill with metalwork or, God forbid, Dionysus' way with the vine plants. Luke told me I might be a child of Hermes, a kind of jack of all trades, master of none, but I got the feeling he was just trying to make me feel better. He really didn't know what to make of me either. Despite all of that, I liked camp. I got used to the morning fog over the beach, the smell of the hot strawberry fields in the afternoon, even the weird noises of the monsters in the woods at night. I would eat dinner with Cabin 11, scrape my plate of my meal into the fire, and try to feel some connection to my real dad. Nothing came. Just that warm feeling I'd always had, like the memory of his smile. I tried not to think too much about my mom, but I kept wondering, if gods and monsters were real, if all this magical stuff was possible, surely there was some way to save her, to bring her back. I started to I started to understand Luke's bitterness and how he seemed to resent his father, Hermes. So, okay, maybe gods had important things to do, but couldn't they call once in a while, or thunder, or something? Dionysus could make Diet Coke appear out of thin air. Why couldn't my dad, whoever he was, make the phone appear? Pause there for a second. So, Percy's feelings are starting to change. Um, Last chapter, he wasn't really enjoying camp. He wasn't having a great time, and now he said he's enjoying camp. There's certain things about camp that he's enjoying. One thing I want you to think about as kind of an idea of foreshadowing. What was the one activity that that Percy was good at? Let's go back up and see. What was one thing that he was good at? He wasn't good at archery. He wasn't good at foot racing, but he was good at canoeing. So if you see that in here, it says here, the one thing I really excelled at was canoeing. And that wasn't the kind of heroic skill people expected me to see from a man who had beaten the Minotaur. So I want you to think about that. So if he was good at canoeing, how does that relate to the other events in the chapters from earlier? And how could that help you figure out who his father is? You can go back to the gods and goddesses list and see what you might think. All right, we're going to continue to go. Thursday afternoon, 3 days after I arrived at Camp Half-Blood, I had my first sword fighting lesson. Everybody from Cabin 11 gathered in a big circular arena where Luke would be our instructor. We started with the basic stabbing and slashing, using some straw-stuffed dummies in Greek armor. I guess I did okay. At least I understood what I was supposed to do and my reflexes were good. The problem was I couldn't find a blade that felt right in my hands. Either they were too heavy or too light or too long. Luke tried his best to fix me up, but he agreed that none of the practice blades seemed to work for me. We moved on to dueling in pairs. Luke announced that he would be my partner, since this was my first time. Good luck, one of the campers told me. Luke's the best swordsman in the last 300 years. Maybe he'll go easy on me, I said. The camper snorted. Luke showed me the thrusts and parries and shield blocks the hard way. With every swipe, I got a little more battered and bruised. Keep up your guard, Percy, he'd say, and then he'd whop me in the ribs with the flat of his blade. No, not that far up. Whap, lunge, whap, now back up, whap. By the time he called a break, I was soaked in sweat. Everybody swarmed the drinks cooler. Luke poured ice water on his head, which looked like a good idea. I did the same. Instantly, I felt better. Strength surged back into my arms. The sword didn't feel so awkward. Okay, everybody, circle up, Luke ordered. If Percy doesn't mind, I want to give you a little demo. Great, I thought. Let's all watch Percy get pounded. The Hermes guys gathered around. They were suppressing smiles. I figured they'd be in my shoes before and couldn't wait to see how Luke used me for a punching bag. He told everybody he was going to demonstrate disarming technique, how to twist the enemy's blade with the flat of your sword so that he had no choice but to drop his weapon. This is difficult, he stressed. I've had it used against me. No laughing at Percy now. Most swordsmen have to work years to master this technique. He demonstrated the move on me in slow motion. Sure enough, the sword was clattered out of my hand. Now in real time, he said, after I'd retrieved my weapon. We kept sparring until one of us pulls it off. Ready? I nodded, and Luke came after me. Somehow, I kept him from getting a shot at the hilt of my sword. My senses opened up. I saw his attacks coming. I countered. I stepped forward and tried the thrust of my own. Luke deflected easily, but I saw a change in his face. His eyes narrowed, and he started to press me with more force. The sword grew heavy in my hand. The balance wasn't right. I knew it was only a matter of seconds before Luke took me down, so I figured, what the heck? I tried the disarming maneuver. My blade hit the base of Luke's and twisted, putting my whole weight into the downward thrust. Clang! Luke's sword rattled against the stones. The tip of the blade was an inch from his undefended chest. The other campers were silent. I lowered my sword. Sorry. Sorry? His scarred face broke into a grin. By the gods, Percy, why are you sorry? Show me that again. I didn't want to. The short burst of manic energy had completely abandoned me, but Luke insisted. This time there was no contest. The moment our swords connected, Luke hit my hilt and sent my weapon skidding across the floor. After a long pause, somebody in the audience said, "Beginner's luck?" Luke wiped his sweat off his brow. He appraised at me with an entirely new interest. Maybe, he said, but I wonder what Percy could do with a balanced sword. Pause there. What gave Percy that energy? Remember, if you were saying he was kind of feeling tired, he was done, and he wasn't really ready to keep fighting. And then he did something that Luke did. If you look back up here, said by the time he called a break, I was soaked in sweat. Everybody swarmed drinks for the cooler. Luke poured ice water on his head, which looked like a good idea. I did the same. Instantly, I felt better. Strength surged through my arms, and the sword didn't feel so awkward. So keep that in mind again as we're continuing to read, because that connects to the last few events that we learned about him with the water. So let's keep going and see what that means. Friday afternoon, I was sitting with Grover at the lake, resting from a near-death experience on a climbing wall. Grover had scampered to the top of the mountain like a mountain goat, but the lava had almost gotten me. My shirt had smoking holes in it. The hairs had been singed off my forearms. We sat on the pier, watching the naiads and do underwater basket weaving until I got up the nerve to ask Grover how his conversation with Mr. D. His face turned sickly shade of yellow. Fine, he said. Just great. So your career's still on the right track? He glanced at me nervously. Chiron told you that I want a searcher's license? Well, no, I had no idea what a searcher's license was, but it didn't seem like the right time to ask. He just said that you had big plans, and you needed credit for completing a keeper's assignment. So did you get it? Grover looked down at the naiads. Mr. D suspended judgment. He said I hadn't failed or succeeded with you yet. So our fates were still tied together. If you got a quest and I went along to protect you and we both came back alive, then maybe he'd consider the job complete. My spirits lifted. Well, that's not so bad, right? Blah, ha, ha, ha. He might as well have transferred me to the stable cleaning duty. The chances of you getting a quest, and even if you did, why would you want me along? Of course I'd want you along. Grover stared glumly into the water. Basket weaving. Must be nice to have a useful skill. I tried to reassure him that we had lots of talents, but that just made him look more miserable. We talked about canoeing and swordplay for a while, then debated the pros and cons of different gods. Finally, I asked him about the 4 empty cabins. Number 8, the silver one, belongs to Artemis, he said. She vowed to be a maiden forever, so of course, no kids. The cabin is, honorary. If she didn't have one, she'd be mad. Yeah, okay, but the other 3, the ones at the end, are those the big 3? Grover tensed. We were getting close to the touchy subject. No, one of them, number 2, is Hera's, he said. That's another honorary thing. She's the goddess of marriage, so of course she wouldn't go around having affairs with mortals. That's her husband's job. When we say the big 3, we mean the 3 powerful brothers, the sons of Kronos, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. Right, after the great battle with the Titans, they took over the world, and their dad drew lots to decide who got what. Zeus got the sky, I remembered, Poseidon the sea, and Hades the underworld. Uh-huh. But Hades doesn't have a cabin here. No, he doesn't have a throne on Olympus either. He sort of does his own thing, down in the underworld. If he did have a cabin here, Grover shuddered, well, it wouldn't be pleasant. Let's leave it at that. But Zeus and Poseidon, they both had like a bazillion kids in the midst. Why are their cabins empty? Grover shifted his hooves uncomfortably. About 60 years ago, after World War II, the big 3 agreed that they wouldn't sire any more heroes. Their children were just too powerful. They were affecting the course of human events too much, causing too much carnage. World War II, that was basically a fight between the sons of Zeus and Poseidon on one side and the son of Hades on the other. The winning side, Zeus and Poseidon, made Hades swear an oath with them. No more affairs with mortal women. They all swore on the river Styx. Thunder boomed. I said, that's the most serious oath you can make. Grover nodded. And the brothers kept their oath? Or their word? Or no kids? Grover's face darkened. 17 years ago, Zeus fell off the wagon. There was this TV starlet with big fluffy 80s hairdo. He just couldn't help himself. When their child was born, a little girl named Thalia, well, the River Styx is so serious about promises. Zeus himself got off easy because he's immortal, but he brought a terrible fate on his daughter. But that isn't fair. It wasn't the girl's fault. Grover hesitated. Percy, children of the Big Three have powers greater than other half bloods. They have a strong aura, a scent that attracts monsters. When Hades found out about the girl, he wasn't too happy about Zeus breaking his oath. Hades let the worst monsters out of Tartarus to torment Thalia. A satyr was assigned to be her keeper when she was 12, but there was nothing he could do. He tried to escort her here with a couple of other half-bloods she'd befriended. They almost made it. They got all the way to the top of that hill. He pointed across the valley to the pine tree where I'd fought the Minotaur. All three kindly ones were after them, along with a horde of hellhounds. They were about to be overrun when Thalia told her satyr to take the other two half-bloods to safety while she held off the monsters. She was wounded and tired, but she didn't want to live like a hunted animal. The satyr didn't want to leave her, but he couldn't change her mind, and he had to protect the others, so Thalia made her final stand alone, at the top of the hill. As she died, Zeus took pity on her. He turned her into that pine tree. Her spirit still protects the borders of the valley. That's why the hill is called Half-Blood Hill. I stared at the pine in the distance. The story made me feel hollow and guilty too. A girl my age had sacrificed herself to save her friends. She had faced a whole army of monsters. Next to that, my victory over the Minotaur didn't seem like much. I wondered, if I'd acted differently, could I have saved my mother? Grover, I said, have heroes really gone on quests to the underworld? Sometimes, he said. Orpheus, Hercules, Houdini, and have they ever returned somebody from the dead? No, never. Orpheus came close. Percy, you're not seriously thinking. No, I lied. I was just wondering. So, a satyr is always assigned to guard a demigod. Remember, a demigod is the same as a half-blood. Grover studied me warily. I hadn't persuaded him that I'd really dropped the underworld idea. Not always. We go undercover to a lot of schools. We try to sniff out the half-bloods who have the makings of great heroes. If we find one with a very strong aura, like the child of a Big Three, we alert Chiron. He tries to keep an eye on them, since they could cause really huge problems. And you found me. Chiron said that you thought I might be something special. Grover looked as if he had just led me into Grover looked as if I'd just led him into a trap. I didn't. Oh, listen, don't think like that. If you were, you'd never ever be allowed on a quest, and I'd never get my license. You're probably a child of Hermes, or maybe even one of the minor gods like Nemesis, the god of revenge. Don't worry, okay? I got the idea. He was reassuring himself more than me. So again, I want you to think there one more time. So if you think back to the earlier chapters, we find out that that is exactly what happened. Grover contacted Chiron to look after Percy at Yancy Academy. So maybe he is one of those major demigods. Maybe his father is one of the Big Three. Let's find out. The night after dinner, there was a lot more excitement than usual. At last, it was time for Capture the Flag. When the plates were cleared away, the conch horn sounded, and we all stood at our tables. Campers yelled and cheered as Annabeth and two of her siblings ran into the pavilion carrying a silk banner. It was about 10 feet long, glistening gray, with a painting of a barn owl above the olive tree. From the opposite side of the pavilion, Clarice and her buddies ran in with another banner, of identical side, but gaudy red, painted with blood spear and boar's head. I turned to Luke and yelled over the noise. Those are the flags? Yeah. Ares and Athena always lead the teams? Not always, he said, but often. So, if another cabin captures one, what do? Repaint the flag? He grinned. You'll see. First, we have to get one. Whose side are we on? He gave me a sly look, as if he knew something I didn't. The scar on his face made him look almost evil in the torchlight. We've made a temporary alliance with Athena. Tonight we get the flag from Ares, and you are going to help. The teams were announced. Athena had made an alliance with Apollo and Hermes, the two biggest cabins. Apparently, privileges had been traded shower times, chore schedules, and the best slots for activities in order to win support. Ares had allied themselves and everybody else Dionysus, Demeter, Aphrodite, Hephaestus. From what I had seen, Dionysus' kids were really good athletes, but there were only two of them. Demeter's kids had the edge with nature skills and outdoor stuff, but they weren't very aggressive. Aphrodite's sons and daughters, I wasn't too worried about. They mostly sat out every activity and checked their reflections in the lake and did their hair and gossiped. Hephaestus's kids weren't pretty, and there were only four of them, but they were big and burly from working in the metal shop all day. They might be a problem. That, of course, left Ares' cabin, a dozen of the biggest, ugliest, meanest kids on Long Island or anywhere else on the planet. Chiron hammered his hoof on the marble. Heroes, he announced. You know the rules. The creek is the boundary line. The entire forest is fair game. All magic items are allowed. The banner must be prominently displayed and have no more than 2 guards. Prisoners may be disarmed, but may not be bound or gagged. No killing or maiming is allowed. I will serve as referee and the battlefield medic. Arm yourselves. He spread his hands, and the tables were suddenly covered with equipment. Helmets, bronze swords, spears, oxhide shields coated in metal. Whoa, I said. We're really supposed to use these? Luke looked at me as if I were crazy. Unless you want to get skewered by your friends in Cabin 5. Here, Chiron thought these would fit. You'll be on border patrol. My shield was the size of an NBA backboard, with a big caduceus in the middle. It weighed about 1,000,000 pounds. I could have snowboarded on it fine, but I hoped nobody seriously expected me to run fast. My helmet, like the helmets on Athena's side, had blue horsehair plume on top of it. Ares and their allies had red plumes. Annabeth yelled, "Blue team, forward!" We cheered and shook the swords and followed her down the path to the south woods. The red team yelled taunts at us as if they were headed off toward the north. I managed to catch up with Annabeth without tripping over my equipment. Hey, she kept marching. So, what's the plan? I asked. Got any magic items you can loan me? Her hand drifted towards her pocket, as if she were afraid I'd stolen something. Just watch Clarice's spear, she said. You don't want that thing touching you. Otherwise, don't worry. We'll take the banner from Ares. Has Luke given you your job? Border patrol, whatever that means. It's easy. Stand by the creek. Keep the Reds away. Leave the rest to me. Athena always has a plan. She pushed ahead, leaving me in the dust. Okay, I mumbled. Glad you wanted me on your team. It was a warm, sticky night. The woods were dark, with fireflies popping in and out of view. Annabeth stationed me next to a little creek that gurgled over some rocks, and then she and the rest of the team scattered into the trees. Standing there alone, with my blue feathered helmet and my huge shield, I felt like an idiot. The bronze sword, like all the other swords I'd tried so far, seemed balanced wrong. The leather grip pulled on my hand like a bowling ball. There was no way anybody would actually attack me, would they? I mean, Olympus had to have liability issues, right? Far away, the conchorn blew. I heard whoops and yells and in the woods, the clanking of metal, kids fighting. A blue-plumed ally from Apollo raced past me like a deer, leaped through the creek, and disappeared into the enemy territory. Great, I thought. I'll miss all the fun, as usual. Then I heard a sound that sent a chill up my spine, a low canine growl, somewhere close behind. I raised my shield instinctively. I had the feeling something was stalking me. Then the growling stopped. I felt the presence retreating. On the other side of the creek, the underbrush exploded. 5 Ares warriors came yelling and screaming out of the dark. Cream the punk, Clarice screamed. Her ugly pig eyes glared through the slits of her helmet. She brandished a 5-foot-long spear, its barbed metal tip flicking with the red light. Her siblings had only the standard-issued bronze swords. Not that that made me feel any better. They charged across the stream. There was no help in sight. I could run or I could defend myself against half of the Ares cabin. Pause there. So, what is the conflict that Percy is in right now? Is it character versus self, character versus nature, or character versus society? Yes, it's character versus character. He's in another problem with Clarice and the people that are in her cabin, the Aries people. So once again, this is going to be a physical conflict. They're about to try to fight him with they have their swords drawn. They're all ready. So let's see what happens. I managed to sidestep the first kid's swing, but these guys were not as stupid as the Minotaur. They surrounded me, and Clarice thrust at me with her spear. My shield deflected the point, but I felt a painful tingling all over my body. My hair stood on end. My shield arm went numb, and the air burned. Electricity. Her stupid spear was electric. I fell back. Another Aries guy slammed me in the chest with the butt of his sword, and I hit the dirt. They could have kicked me to jelly, but they were too busy laughing. Give him a haircut, Clarice said. Grab his hair. I managed to get to my feet. I raised my sword, but Clarice slammed it aside with her spear as sparks flew. Now both my arms were numb. Oh, wow, Clarice said. I'm scared of this guy, really scared. The flag is that way, I told her. I wanted to sound angry, but I was afraid it didn't come out that way. Yeah, one of her siblings said. But see, we don't care about the flag. We care about the guy who made our cabin look stupid. You do that without my help, I told them. It probably wasn't the smartest thing to say. Two of them came at me. I backed up toward the creek, tried to raise my shield, but Clarice was too fast. Her spear stuck me straight in the ribs. If I hadn't been wearing an armored breastplate, I would have been shish kebabbed. As it was, the electric point just about shocked my teeth out of my mouth. One of her cabin mates slashed his sword close across my arm, leaving a good-sized cut. Seeing my own blood made me dizzy, warm and cold at the same time. No maiming, I managed to say. Oops, the guy said. Guess I lost my dessert privilege. He pushed me into the creek. I landed with a splash. They all laughed. I figured as soon as they were through being amused, I would die. But then something happened. The water seemed to wake my senses, as if I had just had a bag of my mom's double espresso jelly beans. Pause there for a second. I want you to think about the Aries cabin, and I want you to think about what character traits you could use to describe them based on their thoughts, their words, and their actions. So one thing, like, they're fighting him, and he's just on his own. So that's, like, super unfair and not very nice. The second thing that I noticed is that they're all laughing at him instead of, like, helping him. They're being kind of rude. So I would use the word rude or kind of, like, aggressive to describe their characters. Let's keep going and see what happens, because right now he just fell back into the water, and it says it woke up his senses. So he's falling in the water, and if you remember, that connects back to the beginning of this chapter when he dumped the water all over his head, and again, he felt all of that come back to him. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind how that might relate to who his father is. Clarice and her cabin mates came into the creek to get me, but I stood to meet them. I knew what to do. I swung the flat of my sword against the first guy's head and knocked his helmet clean off. I hit him so hard I could see his eyes vibrating as he crumpled into the water. Ugly number 2 and ugly number 3 came at me. I slammed one in the face with my shield and used my sword to shear off the other guy's horsehair plume. Both of them backed up quick. Number 4 didn't look really anxious to attack, but Clarice kept coming, the point of her spear cracking with energy. As soon as she thrust, I caught the shaft between the edge of my shield and my sword and snapped it like a twig. Ah, she screamed. You idiot, you corpse-breath worm. She probably would have said worse, but I smacked her between the eyes with my sword butt and sent her stumbling backward out of the creek. Then I heard yelling, elated screams, and I saw Luke racing towards the boundary line with the red team's banner lifted high. He was flanked by a couple of Hermes guys covering his retreat, and a few Apollos behind them, fighting off the Hephaestus kids. The Aries folks got up, and Clarice muttered a dazed curse. A trick, she shouted. It was a trick. They staggered after Luke, but it was too late. Everybody converged on the creek as Luke ran across into the friendly territory. Our side exploded into cheers. The red banner shimmered and turned to silver. The boar and the spear were replaced with huge caduceus, the symbol of Cabin 11. Everybody on the blue team picked up Luke and started carrying him around on their shoulders. Kyron cantered out from the woods and blew the conkhorn. The game was over. We'd won. I was about to join the celebration when Annabeth's voice, right next to me in the creek, said, "Not bad, hero." I looked, but she wasn't there. "Where the heck did you learn to fight like that?" she asked. The air shimmered and she materialized, holding a Yankees baseball cap as if she'd taken it off her head. I felt myself getting angry. I wasn't even fazed by the fact that she had just been invisible. "You set me up," I said. "You put me here because you knew Clarice would come after me, while you sent Luke around the flank. You had it all figured out." Annabeth shrugged. "I told you Athena always has a plan to get me pulverized." I came as fast as I could. I was about to jump in, but she shrugged. "You didn't need help." Then she noticed my wounded arm. "How did you do that?" "Sword cut," I said. "What do you think?" "No, it was a sword cut. Look at it." The blood was gone. Where the huge cut had been, there was a long white scratch that even was fading. As I watched, it turned into a smaller scar and disappeared. I don't get it," I said. Annabeth was thinking hard. I could almost see the gears turning. She looked down at my feet, and then at Clarice's broken spear and said, "Step out of the water, Percy." "What?" "Just do it." I came out of the creek immediately and felt bone tired. My arms started to go numb again. My adrenaline rush left me. I almost fell over, but Annabeth steadied me. "Oh, sticks," she cursed. "This is not good. I assumed it would be Zeus." Before I could ask what she meant, I heard the canine growl again, but much closer than before. A howl ripped through the forest. The campers' cheering died instantly. Kyron shouted something in ancient Greek, which I would realize only later I had understood perfectly. "Stand ready, my bow." Annabeth drew her sword. There on the rocks just above us was a black hound the size of a rhino, with lava red eyes and fangs like a dagger. It was looking straight at me. Nobody moved except Annabeth, who yelled, "Percy, run!" She tried to step in front of me, but the hound was too fast. It leapt over her, an enormous shadow with teeth, just as it hit me. As I stumbled backward and felt its razor-sharp claws ripping through my armor, there was a cascade of thwacking sounds, like 40 pieces of paper being ripped one after the other. From the hound's neck sprouted a cluster of arrows. The monster fell, dead, at my feet. By some miracle, I was still alive. I didn't want to look underneath the ruins of my shedded armor. My chest felt warm and wet, and I knew I was badly cut. Another second, and the monster would have turned me into 100 pounds of delicatessen meat. Kyron trotted up next to us, a bow in his hand, his face grim. "De immortales," Annabeth said. "That's a hellhound from the fields of punishment. They're not supposed to." "Someone summoned it," Kyron said. "Someone inside this camp." Luke came over to the banner in his hand. He had forgotten. His moment of glory was gone. Clarice yelled, "It's all Percy's fault. Percy summoned it." "Be quiet, child," Kyron told her. We watched the body of the hellhound melt into shadow, soaking into the ground until it disappeared. "You're wounded," Annabeth told me. "Quick, Percy, get in the water." "I'm okay." "No, you're not," she said. "Kyron, watch this." I was too tired to argue. I stepped back into the creek and the whole camp gathering around me. Instantly, I felt better. I could feel the cuts on my chest closing up. Some of the campers gasped. "Look, I don't know why," I said, trying to apologize. "I'm sorry." But they weren't watching my wounds heal. They were staring at something above my head. "Percy," Annabeth said, pointing. By the time I looked up, the sign was already fading, but I could still make out the hologram of green light, spinning and gleaming. A 3-tipped spear. A trident. "Your father," Annabeth murmured. "This is really not good." "It's determined," Kyron announced. All around me, the campers started kneeling, even the Ares cabin, though they didn't look happy about it. "My father?" I asked, completely bewildered. "Poseidon," said Kyron. "Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses, hail, Percy Jackson, son of the sea god." All right, so we'll pause there. So I want to know if your prediction was correct. Did you think Poseidon was going to be his father? If you look at the chart, you can see Poseidon is the god of sea and horses, and a trident is his weapon. And you can look here, that's the trident right there. Again, god of the sea. So everything that gave him strength was water. All of the things that, like all of the ways that he was able to defeat people was using water. So those were all of those different things that helped us figure out that Poseidon was his father. So today what you're going to do for your assignment is it's multiple choice. So you're going to say the author, Rick Riordan, gives the readers many clues to help them determine Percy's father. Which of the following is not a clue? So read through these and figure out which one was not a clue. All of these happened. Which one didn't help you figure out that who his father was? And then you can find your evidence. Then if you look at these two questions, why does the author give the readers clue about Percy's father before he knows who he is? So before Percy knows who his father is, why is the author giving us clues? What was the reason for that? And then I just want to know, was your prediction correct? All of the chapter is below, so you can always go back to the chapter to help you figure out your answers. All right, I hope you had a great class. Wacky Wednesday, wacky hair. Tomorrow is superhero day, so we will read chapter 4, or read, no, that was chapter 8, so read chapter 9 and be dressed up like our superheroes. All right, I will see you tomorrow. Bye.